Construction materials processing. I'm here to show you how to safely make a cut on the table saw. There's two types of cuts that I went over in cut types that we do mainly on the table saw, and that is cross-cutting and ripping. The same general idea is going to be used for both of them, but I'll go over them separately here. I'm going to make this quick. If I'm cross-cutting, the idea always is to push things through a table saw blade and any rigid blade straight and true, and as equally as I possibly can. So if I have a longer board that I want to cross-cut, I'm not going to just do it freehand. That's not going to happen. That never happens on the table saw. It's way too dangerous. So you always have to have something to help guide you through squarely and evenly, so that we don't tilt. We just don't want to bind that blade by going sideways at all, ever. And you never, ever, ever want to trap things between the rip fence and the blade when you're cross-cutting. So do not use the rip fence when you're using the miter gauge. It is very dangerous, okay? So anyway, usually when you're using the miter gauge, you're going to grip it with, I'm using the left-hand table slot. That's what most people use when they cross-cut. You can use the right-hand table slot, and in that case, you're going to stand over here, okay, on the right-hand side as you grip with your left hand and push with your right, okay, or push with your left hand with the grip and guide with your right. I'm sorry, I would hold it on here like this. When I'm in the left-hand table side, I do the opposite. I grip with my left hand, hold this grip, and push with my right, okay? You do not want to stand in line with that blade when you're making any kind of cut, if it's at all possible. Because if something happens and it throws it backwards because that blade is spinning this way, it'll throw it this way, it will then hit me, okay? So try to stand out of the line of the blade, and that's a rule on most saws. Anyway, so I'm going to cross-cut, I'm going to hold it nice and tight, and I'm going to evenly push it through the blade. Now I want to push it all the way past the blade, right? And because of that, I have a couple slots up here that my miter gauge can slide into. All right, all the way past, nice and even. Then I would move my material out of the way, take my piece. That's a cross-cut. Now, if I have a really big piece that I want to cross-cut, I can use what they call auxiliary support. And this is just a piece of board with two screws in it that fit in the two slots on my miter gauge. And now I have a wider point of contact on the piece I want to cross-cut. What that allows me to do is have greater control to push it more evenly. So this is called auxiliary support. Anytime you have a longer piece, you want to use auxiliary support. And I have longer pieces of auxiliary support that we can mount to this. So the longer the piece, the wider your auxiliary support. If it's long enough, you might even want to have a partner out here holding the end of it, okay? All they're going to do, all they ever do is hold it so that you do not, you don't have to hold the weight and keep it balanced. They are not pushing, they are not helping, they're just holding, okay? So, auxiliary support, helper if it's really long when you're cross-cutting. Same concepts when you're ripping, and the same concepts when you're ripping apply when you're cross-cutting as well. When I'm ripping, the one thing that happens more is, people want to tilt it up or tilt it like this. It seems to be a little easier to keep it flat on the table when I'm cross-cutting, but you're always trying to keep things flat on the table and move them through that blade evenly. So when I'm ripping, I'm going to be moving my rip fence close to my blade, and I'm going to use that to push my board up against and slide right down that rip fence as my guide, okay? Now this is a 2.5 inch wide board. I'm going to set my rip fence for 1 3/4 inches. Okay, and I use the lock. And when I do this, I'm going to push. This is one of the other rules. I stay on the line of that blade. I push it up against my rip fence with my left hand, and I feed it through with my right. Now, regardless of whether I'm cross-cutting or ripping, how fast I go through is one of those things that's kind of hard for me to teach you right here. The harder the lumber, the thicker the lumber, the slower you have to go. But you don't want to typically go too slow, because then you can burn the wood if you leave it in one place for too long. So you don't want that either, and then you got to sand all that out. But you'd rather burn it than go too fast, because if you go too fast, you'll work the saw too much and it doesn't have a chance to cut properly and it can be more dangerous. So if you err on one side, err slower than faster. But the more you do this, the more you'll kind of figure out the way the saw sounds and feels, how fast to push it through. It just takes practice. Okay, so I call that pace. Again, hold this up against with your left hand and push it through with your right. Keep it as flat as possible, and the whole idea is to go as straight through as you possibly can. Now, we don't want to lose our balance, no matter what type of cut we're making. We don't want to be reaching over or getting out of balance so that we have to catch ourselves on the saw. Always try to keep your balance, move your feet. If it's a long piece, I want to move my feet as I'm going so I keep my balance, and just pay attention to what's going on. You can't be distracted in here while you're cutting. You can't be messing around with your friends. It is not a joke. It's kind of like driving. You think it's going to be safe, and in an instant, things can go pretty bad. Okay? So balance, attention, up against the rip fence with your left hand, push with your right, stay out of line of the blade, keep it flat to the surface, and push it as straight as you can and try to find the right pace. Okay? The last thing is, when we have narrow spaces here, I'm going to have to push it through the last little bit with a push stick. 6 inches is the rule. If I'm going to be closer than 6 inches, use a push stick. So if I'm all the way out here, I can go ahead and push it through with my hand because I'm still 6 inches away from the blade. But I'm only 1 3/4 inches away from that blade. So I'm going to have to really keep it tight. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this. This is not super long, but it's a little long. And the last thing I guess I forgot to say is, if I have a really long piece and I'm ripping, just like when I'm cross-cutting, I'm going to have a partner out there that we call the off-bearer, and they're going to, again, just hold it and walk with it so that they hold the weight. You don't want to be holding, if it's a really long board, you don't want to be holding it down to the table flat as it tilts forward, right? You want them to hold it up for you so you can concentrate on pushing it against the fence and through the blade evenly. Okay? So I'm going to go ahead and cut this, and then the video will be over. So it should start. Okay, so that's it. The only thing I didn't do there is I didn't turn on the system. It's down right now. Usually we would have the vacuum on. But other than that, let's be safe.